She was the last student picked up that morning. She smiled at the driver and climbed the steps like she always did. But it took 14 years to find her shoes, buried deep in the bus's undercarriage, long after it was sold at auction. At 7:58 a.m. on September 12, 2009, the bus pulled up the gravel lane off Clover Hill Road for its final pickup of the morning. 9-year-old Gracie Dunn stood at the end of her driveway, lunchbox in one hand, the other waving toward the porch where her father watched her from the steps. She wore a sky blue jacket and light pink sneakers with worn-out glitter patches on the toes. The air smelled like wet leaves. According to the driver, Henry Mallard, she boarded the bus without hesitation. She smiled, said hi. "Second row, right side, same seat as always." 7 more minutes passed as the bus made 2 final stops. By 8:16 a.m., it pulled into the lot at Ashbury Elementary, where 23 other children filed off and into the front lobby. Nobody noticed that Gracie wasn't among them. There was no head count taken at the door. No surveillance camera pointed toward the bus steps. The driver saw kids exit in groups, laughing, pushing, adjusting backpacks, no different than any other day. Gracie's name wasn't marked absent. Her teacher assumed she was running late. At 10:22 a.m., the school secretary called her home. There was no answer. By 12:08 p.m., the school resource officer had phoned the sheriff's department. 2 deputies arrived before the final bell. The driver was called back in. Parents were notified. Gracie's father had been at work since before sunrise. He only learned his daughter was missing when a patrol car pulled into the lumber yard and asked to speak with him privately. A search began that afternoon. First the school grounds, then the bus lot, then the wooded edges near Clover Hill. Officers knocked on doors, called neighbors, organized volunteers. They swept the path from her home to the bus stop, then the route from the bus to the school. Nothing. There were no signs of struggle, no suspicious vehicles, no reports of screaming, running, or someone veering off the path. According to every witness and the driver himself, Gracie Dunn boarded that bus and was never seen again. The bus itself was processed and returned to service within the week. She was never found. No missing clothes, no dropped lunchbox, not a single thread. The case went cold by winter. Flyers came down. Search teams disbanded. Life, in its terrible way, moved on. And for 14 years, there was nothing, until the day a salvager opened an old rusted panel in the undercarriage of a decommissioned school bus and found a child's shoes sealed inside. Still clean, still tied, still waiting. Gracie had never gotten off the bus. The man who found them didn't know what he was looking at first. He'd bought the bus at a government surplus auction in Indiana. Paid cash. It was listed as non-operational, stored off-site, frame intact. He wasn't planning to drive it, just strip it down for scrap and maybe repurpose the frame as a trailer bed. It had been sitting behind a county vehicle depot for almost a decade, half swallowed by vines and dirt, the wheels sunken, the windows clouded with mold. He towed it back to his property and started tearing it apart that same weekend. The seats came out easily, rusted bolts snapping at the base. The flooring peeled with effort. But it wasn't until he crawled under the rear axle to access the lower wiring harness that he noticed something strange. A warped panel, slightly separated along the undercarriage seam near the rear wheel well. 4 screws mismatched, like they'd been removed and put back more than once. He unscrewed the panel, expecting to find old tools, maybe a rodent nest. Instead, he found a plastic-wrapped bundle pressed tight into the hollow, dust-covered but sealed against moisture. Inside were a pair of children's sneakers. Pink, glittered, laces still tied. He froze. At first, he didn't make the connection. He was from the next county over. didn't recognize the name faintly scrawled inside the tongue of the left shoe in purple marker. But his wife did. When he brought them inside and showed her, she went pale. "Those look like hers," she said. "From the case. That girl." She looked it up. The photos were still online, archived through old local news reports. Gracie Dunn. 9 years old. Disappeared without a trace in 2009. Last seen boarding a school bus. The man called the sheriff's department the next morning. By noon, the bus was cordoned off, and a forensic unit was en route. Investigators removed the entire undercarriage panel and began photographing the cavity. The shoes were bagged, cataloged, and compared to the original evidence description from the missing persons report. They matched exactly. Size, brand, style, even the marker on the inside tongue. 14 years later, it was the first confirmed piece of physical evidence ever recovered. No blood, no tissue, no clothing scraps, just shoes, carefully wrapped, hidden where no child could reach on their own. No animal could drag them. No accident could explain them. The frame number on the bus matched the one listed on the original case file, Route 6, District Vehicle ID, #242. It was the same bus, the one she boarded, the one no one thought to search that closely. And now, just like that, the case was no longer cold. The news spread quickly, but not officially. There was no press release, no formal statement from the sheriff's department. Just a quiet call to the lead detective from the original case, now retired, and a series of back-channel messages passed between old investigators, county clerks, and district officials. One of the deputies leaked a detail to a former reporter who posted a vague tweet late that night. It read only, "Remember Gracie Dunn? The bus was just found." By morning, a local Facebook group had picked it up, then a true crime subreddit. Within 24 hours, national media outlets were calling the sheriff's office for comment. But there was nothing to confirm. Only a pair of shoes, a salvaged bus, and a deeply uncomfortable timeline. Gracie Dunn had vanished on the morning of September 12, 2009. The bus she boarded that day continued in service for another 9 months before being pulled from rotation, quietly decommissioned, and moved to long-term storage. It was never officially listed as evidence. It had never been fully dismantled. The panel where the shoes were found wasn't part of the original search. The original detective, Brian Ellison, was hesitant to rejoin the case. He'd spent years haunted by it. The girl who disappeared with no sound, no scene, no warning. He had theories. Everyone did. Stranger abduction, school staff involvement, even the driver, though nothing had ever stuck. But this changed things. Not because the shoes provided a new answer, but because they raised a new question. Why were they hidden? Not discarded, not lost. Hidden. Folded in plastic, tucked into a cavity that could only be accessed from beneath the vehicle. 4 screws reattached. Intentional. There were no signs of moisture damage, no insect activity. Whoever put them there did so carefully, almost respectfully, as if the shoes weren't trash, but something that needed to be preserved. Ellison stared at the evidence photos for a long time. Same shoes, same laces, same scuffed glitter patch on the toe from where she used to drag her feet on the porch steps. He remembered her father showing him that once, on the 3rd day of the search, a pointless detail at the time. Now it caught his breath. He picked up the phone and called the new lead, Detective Aria Lane. "Don't talk to the press," he said, "and don't go chasing suspects yet." "Why not?" she asked. "Because whoever put those shoes there—" He paused. They didn't panic. They took their time. Lane was quiet. Then, so this wasn't a moment of impulse. "No," Ellison said. "It wasn't. Whoever did this knew the bus. They knew how it would be searched, and they knew exactly what to hide and what not to. For the first time in 14 years, the question wasn't just where Gracie had gone. It was, how long had she been kept close without anyone realizing? The bus was moved to a secure forensic facility outside Evansville 2 days after the shoes were found. It arrived on a flatbed trailer, tarped and tagged with state patrol escort, not because it was high profile yet, but because they didn't want it to become one. The original exterior paint was faded, chipped from sun exposure and years of neglect, but the vehicle identification number was still clearly visible beneath the driver's side window. 242, Route 6. The same bus, the one everyone had stopped thinking about. Detective Aria Lane stood inside the service bay as technicians began the slow work of dismantling it. Not casually, fully. Seat rails removed, floor panels drilled out, wall rivets cataloged, stored, marked. Every corner was scanned, every cavity endoscoped. This wasn't a salvage job. It was an autopsy. The shoes were re-examined. Still no DNA, no traceable hairs, fibers, prints. Whoever handled them had either worn gloves or knew exactly how to avoid detection. The plastic wrap was standard, the kind used to bundle produce in bulk shipping. No brand, no stamps. Inside the panel where they were found, technicians uncovered traces of weather-sealing adhesive, an off-brand epoxy used by the district's maintenance team during bodywork repairs. According to records, Bus 242 had undergone light welding along its lower frame in March 2009, 6 months before Gracie disappeared. Lane tracked down the mechanic who'd logged the repair. He now lived in Kentucky, long retired. Over the phone, he remembered nothing about the job, but confirmed one thing. That panel? We never open those unless we have to. They're not even on the checklist. He paused. But I'll tell you what's weird, he added. Those screws? If they were mismatched, somebody got in there after the fact. Because we only use one type, all district standard. Always the same thread, same size. Lane stared at the photos again. The top screw was painted yellow, same as the original body. The others weren't. One was silver, the other 2 rusted. 14 years. Someone had opened that panel, placed the shoes inside, and sealed it again, without alerting anyone. So she hadn't simply vanished. She'd been hidden. That word clung to every report Lane filed over the next week. Hidden. Not taken. Not lost. Hidden. Inside a space no one had reason to look, where no child could climb, where nothing could fall by accident. A dead compartment in a trusted vehicle. Whoever did it didn't need to run. They just needed to wait. And someone, back in 2009, either failed to notice or chose not to. Detective Lane requested access to the original case files. Not the copies, not the summaries. The actual evidence boxes stored at the Knox County Archives. What she found was chaos. Poorly labeled folders, misfiled photographs, interrogation notes logged out of order, audio cassettes with no transcripts. The original evidence inventory, typed and signed, listed fewer than 12 items. Missing from the file were 3 photos mentioned in the first responding officer's report and an entire set of driver logs that should have been submitted by the transportation supervisor. Lane flagged it immediately. The original detective, Brian Ellison, had mentioned in passing that the case had been rushed through the system. At the time, the district was under scrutiny for other unrelated allegations, a teacher misconduct case, and a custody dispute that had drawn attention from Indianapolis media. The Gracie Dunn disappearance had initially dominated headlines, until it didn't. The district had pushed for fast answers. The bus was cleared within a week. The driver returned to duty 2 days later. Now, all these years later, Lane was staring at a box that felt more like a formality than a real investigation. She reviewed the original driver's statement. Mallard had repeated the same detail in every interview. Gracie boarded the bus, sat in the second row, and said nothing. No unusual behavior. No stops between her house and the school. No strangers seen. No vehicles followed. But then she found something else. A one-page memo, folded into a stapled packet of unrelated notes, dated October 3rd, 2009, 3 weeks after Gracie vanished. It was a service report from the district's internal vehicle maintenance office. It mentioned bus 242. In small print, it read, "Rear cabin seat 2 loose bracket, resecured. Undercarriage vent pan inspected. Debris removed. No further action." It had never been entered into the main case file. Lane circled the sentence, "Undercarriage vent pan inspected." She checked the calendar. That inspection happened 3 days before the bus was officially pulled from service, meaning someone had opened the panel, or claimed to, and cleared it. No mention of the shoes. No evidence collected. Just debris removed. She called the number listed for the inspection sign-off, E. Jennings. The line was disconnected. The district had no current employee by that name. Records showed he had worked on contract for less than 8 months before leaving without formal exit paperwork. There was no forwarding address, no follow-up. It raised a different kind of question, not just who hid the shoes, but who had already seen them and said nothing. Detective Lane brought the memo to her supervisor the next morning. It was still damp from where her coffee cup had sweated onto the page. She didn't apologize. The document wasn't a smoking gun, but it was enough to prove the story they'd told themselves for years wasn't complete. The bus had been checked. That specific compartment. 3 weeks after Gracie disappeared, and someone had written down that they cleared debris from it. That meant one of two things. Either the shoes weren't there yet, or someone saw them, removed them, and never said a word. Both possibilities were equally chilling. Lane submitted a request to track down the original contractor, Edward Jennings. The district's HR records listed no address, no tax forms, and no emergency contact. A payroll stub sent to the Department of Revenue showed a bank deposit routed through a local credit union, but the account had closed in 2011. It was like he had vanished too. She ran his name through state licensing databases. Nothing. Then she tried old DMV records. A commercial license had been issued in 2006, expired 2 years later. The photo showed a lean man in his 40s with a trimmed beard and sun damage along his neck. A copy of the ID had been archived under the name Edward J. Kessler. Different last name. Lane dug deeper. An old court filing linked to the name Kessler showed a sealed juvenile case from the 1980s, one that had been expunged under minor victim protection laws. No details available, no charges listed, just a single notation: prohibited from employment involving minor supervision or custodial access. It should have barred him from working with any school transportation fleet, but he had slipped through. And for exactly 8 months in 2009, he'd had access to every bus in the Knox County system, including Route 6, including Bus 242, including the undercarriage panel where, 14 years later, a child's shoes would be found. Still tied. Still clean. Lane printed out the memo and set it beside the evidence photo. Same panel, same area. 3 weeks after Gracie vanished. If the shoes weren't there, then someone added them later. Someone who knew the bus would eventually be forgotten. If they were there, then the story was worse, because someone had found them and chose to bury the secret all over again. Detective Lane wasn't ready to say it out loud, but the implication was clear. If the shoes had been hidden inside the bus in 2009, and someone inspected that exact panel just 3 weeks after Gracie vanished, then someone in the school district had, at minimum, seen them, or touched them, or decided to remove them and say nothing. Either way, it pointed to a cover-up, not a conspiracy, not a grand plot, just a quiet decision made behind a service gate, sometime in October, by someone who didn't want the spotlight or liability. She tracked down the man who had signed off on the transportation schedule that fall, Harold Bean, former fleet manager. He'd retired in 2015 and moved out of state. His number was still listed in the county phone directory. When Lane called, he answered on the second ring. He sounded winded, like he'd just come in from the cold. "I remember the case," he said. "Everyone does." She asked about the panel inspection memo. There was a pause. "Look," he said, "the guy who filed that, Jennings, Kessler, whatever his name was, I didn't know he had any history. I never saw a background flag. That's on HR, not me." "I'm not asking about his record," Lane replied. "I'm asking if anyone talked to him. After the panel note? After Gracie went missing." A longer pause, then quietly, "No. No one. No one wanted to open that door," Bean said. "The kid vanished on his route. Parents were protesting. Superintendent was holding press conferences. You think we were going to admit we hired someone without clearance?" She didn't speak. "You want my guess?" he said finally. "I think he saw something. I think he freaked. Maybe he didn't know what it meant at the time. Maybe he did. But a week later, he stopped showing up, dropped his radio in the depot, and never came back." Lane felt the familiar churn in her gut. She ended the call, filed the notes, and returned to the evidence bay. The bus was stripped now, metal ribs exposed, panels scattered across plastic tarps. Investigators had found no blood, no hair, no fibers in the panel cavity. But behind the second row, where Gracie had last been seen, a team discovered something else. Pressed into the foam insulation beneath the floorboard was a faint outline, a small indentation, the size of a child's hip and shoulder, curled in on itself, as if someone had hidden there once, lying still. It wasn't proof. It wasn't even admissible. But Lane stared at it for a long time. That was where she was, not for hours, maybe for minutes, maybe for less. But it meant the impossible was now on the table. Gracie had been inside the bus the entire time, and someone had made sure she never left. There was a moment during the original search that had always troubled Brian Ellison, the original lead detective, though he'd never put it in his report. It was day 3. The volunteers had dwindled. The news vans were still parked along Route 6, broadcasting the same sound bites over and over. Gracie's father hadn't gone home since the morning she disappeared. He refused to sit, kept circling the bus lot with a photo in his hand and a look that didn't change. At one point, Ellison watched him walk right up to the parked bus and press his hand against the metal near the back wheel well. Just stood there. Not crying, not speaking, just staring. Later that night, Ellison asked him why. "I don't know," Joel Dunn had said. "It's just, I can't explain it. I know she got on, and I know she didn't get off, so where else could she be?" That quote never made it into any of the statements. It was too vague, too emotional. But Ellison had written it in the margin of his notebook anyway. Now, Detective Lane sat in the same bus shell 14 years later, flipping through those old notes. That line still circled in red ink. So where else could she be? The forensic team had taken impressions of the floor indentation, a hollow formed by years of pressure on old foam, shaped like a child had curled into the space, knees tucked tight. The location lined up almost perfectly with the wall of the undercarriage panel. From the outside, it would have looked like nothing, a sealed unit beneath the seats. From the inside, it would have been a coffin. They couldn't prove she had gone in there. Not yet. But the physics made sense. If a child, small, frightened, maybe coaxed or forced, had crawled into that panel she could have fit, especially if someone knew how to open the screws from inside, especially if they'd done it before. Lane requested a breakdown of similar cases, children who went missing during transit, particularly where no exit point had ever been verified. It returned just 3 matches from the last 2 decades. Only one stood out. A case from Iowa, 1995. A 6-year-old boy who vanished on a school field trip. No confirmed sightings, no body, no vehicle records. The only similarity: the bus he'd ridden on had been decommissioned within a year, sold for scrap, and never inspected again. Lane circled the date and added it to her case board. If there was a pattern, it was hiding in silence. Not through evidence left behind, but through the absence of it. The kind of disappearance that only works if no one looks too closely. The kind of disappearance that doesn't require a chase, only a place to wait. Detective Lane pulled every employment file from the District Transportation Department between 2008 and 2010. Most were routine: long-haul drivers, substitute mechanics, dispatch clerks. But she wasn't looking for people with long histories. She was looking for people who came and went quickly. Short contracts, seasonal hires, temporary IDs. She found 6. One stood out immediately: a man named Glenn Devane. Devane had worked in the bus yard for just 11 weeks in the fall of 2009, starting exactly 9 days before Gracie vanished. His title was listed as Fleet Sanitation and Prep. Technically, his job was to clean the buses after morning drop-offs, sweep floors, empty bins, wipe windows, check for left-behind items. His file included a photocopy of an ID badge. No photo, just name and position. His emergency contact was blank. His background check had been marked as pending. No reference letters, no fingerprints on file. There was no record he'd ever officially clocked out on the day Gracie disappeared. Lane called the number listed in the district's contractor archive. It had been reassigned years ago. She tried the address. It didn't exist anymore. A mobile home lot cleared in 2014 after a flood. She checked DMV. No license under the name Glenn Devane in the state of Indiana after 2010. She ran it through federal employment verification databases. Nothing. As far as the system was concerned, Glenn Devane worked for exactly 11 weeks, then vanished. There were no complaints filed during his tenure, no notes in the dispatch logs. But Lane found a curious line in a maintenance entry dated 3 days before Gracie disappeared. The mechanic had logged a note: rear floor access panel covered in tape residue. Not from us. Flagged for cleaning. No follow-up report. No mention of which bus. But the handwriting in the margin read, Devane notified. Lane stared at that name for a long time. A man who was assigned to clean the very vehicle Gracie disappeared from. A panel sealed from inside. Shoes hidden where no child could reach. And a custodian who started the job days before. And walked away from it forever, just weeks after. When she cross-checked the final employee termination records, the reason listed next to his name was handwritten and almost illegible. But the words became clearer the longer she stared at them. Didn't feel right keeping him on. There was no signature, no interview, no follow-up. Just a man who knew the buses, who had access before anyone else did, and who walked out of the building the week after the first search failed, before anyone knew they'd missed the one place that mattered. Detective Lane didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed with the file open beside her. The words didn't feel right, keeping him on burned into her mind. It wasn't a report. It wasn't protocol. It was someone's gut instinct, scribbled on a line where a standard termination reason should have gone. That alone wouldn't mean anything, except for the timing. Gracie had disappeared on a Friday. By Monday, Devane was gone. No forwarding address, no HR contact. Just gone. The next morning, Lane drove back out to the district's old bus yard, the one where bus 242 had been kept before auction, the one where Devane would have done his cleaning work. It was now a storage lot for snowplows and equipment trailers. The building was locked, but the retired supervisor, an older man named Ron Edgerton, agreed to meet her there. He looked uncomfortable as soon as she mentioned Devane. "I didn't fire him," Edgerton said. "That was above me." "Who did?" "District office. I was told not to ask questions." Lane didn't say anything. She just waited. Edgerton shifted on his feet. He was weird, okay? Didn't say much. Never used the break room. Just drifted around. Always early. Knew where everything was, even before we told him. "Did anyone ever talk to him?" "About the girl?" Lane nodded. Edgerton looked away. "I think one of the drivers asked him something, the Monday after. You know, just in passing. Said something like, 'You hear about the missing kid?' And Devane said." He stopped. Lane leaned forward. "Said what?" He said, "She won't be found." Just like that. Flat. Not surprised. Like he already knew. She stared at him. "Why didn't you report that?" "I don't know. Maybe I didn't want to believe it. Maybe I thought it was just one of those things people say." She didn't respond. Back in her office, she opened the personnel logs again. Devane's application had been hand-filled. The pen pressure varied, shakier on the second page. But what struck her now was what wasn't there. No social security number, no driver's license, no date of birth. Just the name. Glenn Devane. And a line below it where he was supposed to list previous employment. He'd written, private work, mobile clients, temporary setups. That phrase lodged itself in Lane's throat. Temporary setups. Like cleaning buses. Like knowing the ins and outs of a vehicle before anyone else touched it. Like having exactly the kind of knowledge it would take to know which panels weren't checked, which compartments weren't sealed, which screws didn't match. And now, years later, the only thing left of that man in any system was the shoes he didn't take with him. Detective Lane forwarded the name to the Indiana State Intelligence Fusion Center. She requested a sweep across all neighboring states for aliases, payroll records, or old background checks under Glenn Devane and known variants. It returned nothing. No tax filings, no licenses, no medical records, no utilities. The name didn't exist before 2009 or after 2010. Not legally, not officially. But there was one anomaly. In 2011, a used RV registered under the name Glenn D. Vane had been stopped during a DOT inspection near the Kentucky border. The officer logged a minor citation, cracked windshield, expired tag, and then let the driver go. No arrest. No impound. The citation was mailed to a P.O. box in Tennessee. It was never paid. The box was closed within a month. Lane pulled the citation file. It included the officer's dashcam stills. The man in the driver's seat was thin, middle-aged, wearing work gloves and a faded green cap. He didn't look directly at the camera. His ID, a laminated card, not a state-issued license, listed his name as Glenn D. Vane. The handwriting looked familiar. Lane compared it to the bus yard application. Same capital V, same rightward slant. The Fusion Center flagged the image for facial similarity to several missing offender lists. No match. But Lane had seen this before. The kind of identity that's just real enough to pass a glance, but hollow under pressure. Someone who lived in the gaps between systems. Someone who never stayed anywhere long enough to matter. The officer who filed the 2011 citation had since retired. Lane called him anyway. He remembered the man immediately. Kept to himself, the officer said. Didn't want to chat. Told me he was on his way to help a friend fix up some hunting property. had tarps and tools in the back, smelled like gas and soil. "What kind of RV?" Lane asked. "Old Ford chassis, converted interior, bed in the back. One of those rigs you could live out of if you had to." Did he seem nervous? "No," the officer said. "That's what stuck with me. He didn't flinch, didn't ask questions, just waited quiet, like he knew he wasn't the kind of guy anyone looked for." Lane hung up and stared at the citation photo again. A child had vanished from a moving bus, her shoes sealed into a compartment no one thought to check. The man who cleaned that bus disappeared days later, reappeared briefly under a broken name, and then slipped back underground. No arrest record, no warrant, just the quiet knowledge that he'd been there, close enough to touch the floor where Gracie Dunn had last been seen, and close enough, maybe, to put her there himself. By the end of the week, the task force was unofficially active. There were no flashing lights, no press conferences, just a quiet shift in how the investigation was treated. Lane was no longer working alone. 2 analysts from the state unit were assigned to re-interview surviving transportation staff. An FBI field agent, Agent Kyle Barris, was looped in under the Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Program, even though the original window had closed 14 years ago. The question wasn't how to find Gracie. The question now was how close she'd ever really been. Lane requested one more look at the shoes. Not forensics, she'd seen those reports, but a practical demonstration. She asked to be brought to the same model of bus, same year, same floor plan. There was one still parked in the lot behind the county garage, partially gutted for parts. She climbed aboard slowly. The seats creaked. Dust floated in shafts of sun through cracked glass. She walked to the second row on the right, the seat Gracie always took. Then she crouched. The metal floor bolts were spaced just wide enough to allow a hand to reach down into the gap between the seat post and the undercarriage ridge. Beneath it was the cavity, the one no child could reach without help. Lane measured it herself, 11 inches deep, 24 wide. Just enough for a small bundle. Or a small body. Her stomach turned. She stepped off the bus and stood in silence for nearly 5 minutes. Then she made the call. "I need every log of student absences from 2008 to 2012. Not just Gracie's school. Every K6 in Knox and the 3 surrounding counties." The clerk asked why. Lane didn't answer, but she had a theory now, one that had nothing to do with strangers or chance. She thought about Glenn Devane, the quiet man. No record, no trace. A name stitched together from pieces. An RV on the edge of the state. A citation mailed to nowhere. A child who vanished into metal. And she began to wonder, what if this wasn't his first attempt? What if it wasn't even his first success? Later that evening, Lane sat with the forensic photo of Gracie's shoes. She noticed something she hadn't before, a thin, dirty smudge on the left sole. It had gone unmentioned in the lab summary. Not blood, not soil, just a faint half-ring of compressed grit. She zoomed in. It wasn't from pavement. It wasn't from a hallway. It was from a rubber floor, textured and grooved, like the inside of a vehicle, like the steps leading down from a bus door, which meant the shoes had been worn after the ride began. At some point after she boarded, Gracie had stood up, and then, wherever she went, she never came back. The records arrived 3 days later in 4 cardboard boxes. Decades of student absence logs, arranged by year and district. Most of it was routine. Strep outbreaks, family vacations, cold weather truancy. But Lane and Agent Barris weren't looking for full-week absences. They were looking for the kind that didn't trigger alerts. One-day vanishes. Early check-ins that never made it to homeroom. Names that appeared on bus rosters, but not in morning attendance. By the end of the second day, They had flagged 6 entries. 6 students, all under the age of 11, all from rural schools within a 40-mile radius, all marked present by transportation, but not confirmed in class. In 4 cases, parents had called in later that morning to excuse the absence, illness, dental appointment, overslept. In the other 2, no call was made at all. The schools simply logged them as no-shows and moved on. None of the 6 had ever been reported missing. But when Lane dug deeper, patterns emerged. One boy, Tyler Henson, age 8, had reportedly missed school for a dentist appointment in 2007. But when Lane contacted the listed clinic, they had no record of him ever being seen. Another, a girl named Kaylee Ross, was marked absent due to illness in 2011. But her teacher had remembered seeing her at the bus drop-off, even spoke to her briefly. She never saw her again that day. When Lane reached out to Kaylee's parents, they were stunned. They said their daughter did come home that night. She'd just had a quiet day. They couldn't remember details, just that she went straight to her room, skipped dinner, seemed off for a few days. Agent Barris pulled every available yearbook and started scanning photos. 2 of the flagged students had transferred the following semester. 1 moved out of state. Another stopped appearing in any official district records altogether. Too quiet to ignore, too scattered to form a case. Lane printed their photos anyway and pinned them beside Gracie's. She wasn't calling them victims. Not yet. But something connected them. A missed morning, a name on a logbook, and nothing after. Back at the evidence bay, the shoes remained in storage, still tied, still sealed, still mute. Lane asked herself again why someone would go to the trouble of hiding them. Why not burn them, throw them away? Then it struck her. Someone had wanted them to be found. Not right away, years later. Long after the trail had gone cold. Long after fingerprints could fade and names could disappear. Maybe Gracie was never meant to be found. But the shoes were. A message from whoever did it. Or worse, a test. The more Lane stared at the photos, the more one detail gnawed at her. Every student who'd vanished briefly, whose log didn't quite add up, had one thing in common. They all lived near old routes. Routes that had been decommissioned or redrawn after Gracie disappeared. The roads were still there, narrow back roads winding through farmland and pine scrub, but the bus stops were gone. The lines erased from planning maps. Consolidated, the district had said. Fewer buses, fewer costs. But something about it felt deliberate, as if someone had been quietly closing doors behind them. She drove to one of the old stops. It was just a dirt turnout near a soybean field, marked only by a leaning post where a route number had once been stapled. Nothing special. No cameras, no witnesses. Just the kind of place where a child could wait for a bus, and if something happened, no one would know which direction to look. She called Agent Barris. "We need to talk to Mallard." "Mallard?" he said. "The driver? I thought he died." "No, that was a rumor. He retired in 2013, moved to New Harmony. She found him living in a rental trailer on the edge of town, not far from the river." He opened the door slowly, leaning on a cane, eyes clouded with age but alert. He didn't look surprised to see her. "I figured you'd come eventually," he said. They sat at a kitchen table littered with pill bottles and supermarket ads. She laid out a copy of the photo, Gracie's shoes, side by side, perfectly tied. He didn't touch it. "She got on that bus," he said quietly. "I remember, second row, window seat, same as always." "But you don't remember her getting off." "No," he admitted. "But it was chaos every morning. Kids shouting. Teachers pulling them off before I could check heads." "Do you remember anyone else on the lot that morning?" He nodded slowly. There was a new guy. Cleaner. Quiet type. Devane? Could have been. Wore gloves. Always watching. He hesitated. Looked at her directly for the first time. Detective, I didn't open that panel. I never went under the bus. But I always wondered. After it happened, I kept thinking about that morning. I remember hitting a pothole. Big one. About halfway to the school. Whole back end jumped. He looked at the photo again. I heard something shift under the floor. Just once. Thought it was a loose bracket. Which seat? He didn't speak for a long moment. Then finally, right under where she was sitting. Lane left with a tight chest and shaking hands. There had never been a struggle. Never a scream. No one saw her move. No one saw anyone touch her. But maybe she hadn't needed to be taken. Maybe she had been told to hide. And maybe she'd done exactly what she was told. That night, Lane dreamed of the bus. It wasn't moving. It just sat beneath a flickering yard light, quiet and still, the kind of silence that presses in too tightly. She walked its narrow aisle alone. Each seat felt larger than it should have been, looming. And when she looked down, she could see something beneath the floor. Not a body, not a person. Just the shape of fear, coiled, breathless, waiting. She woke up gasping. The shape of the undercarriage cavity burned into her eyelids. The next morning, she made a decision. She went back to the facility, asked for the original floor panel from bus 242, the one removed during the reconstruction. The technicians had cataloged it and stored it in evidence. She wanted to see it herself, touch it. They brought it out on a rolling cart, still marked with reference tape. Lane crouched beside it and ran her hand over the metal, not to feel for fingerprints, but to understand the space. The edges were worn, scratched even, like it had been unscrewed more than once, and along the interior side, hidden from normal view, was a strange curve of scoring, faint but deliberate, like a tool had slipped, or like a child had tried to push it open from inside. Her skin prickled. She requested UV light. The technician hesitated. We already checked for prints. Just humor me, she said. When they ran the lamp over the metal, most of it glowed with the dull smear of years-old grime. But on one section, near the far corner, where the panel curved toward the wheel well, was something faint. A smudge, vertical, tapered at the top. Then another, parallel. Fingers, small, consistent with a child's hand. 4 of them, trailing upward, like someone had pressed from underneath. Once, maybe twice, and then stopped. Lane didn't speak. She just nodded and asked the tech to photograph everything. That night, she sat in her apartment and played the timeline again. Gracie boards the bus. She takes her usual seat. There's a shift, a moment, subtle. The driver hits a pothole. Something moves beneath the floor, a noise he dismisses. She never gets off. No one sees her again. And weeks later, someone accesses the undercarriage panel, seals it shut. 14 years pass. The shoes are found, still tied. And now, here, faint and buried, are the prints. Just enough to prove what had once been denied. She had been there, alive. For how long? No one could say. And that was the thought that broke Lane's composure for the first time in the case. Not the hiding, not the deception, but the question that would never be answered. How long did Gracie wait before she stopped trying to get out? It was the kind of detail that shouldn't mean anything. Just an old maintenance log, filed in the back of a metal drawer in a transportation office slated for demolition. A line scrawled in red ink across the bottom margin, half obscured by a spill. Excess odor reported. Driver noted decay smell near undercarriage. The entry was dated 6 months before the bus was sold at auction. The technician who flagged it, a temp scanning old records for digital conversion, didn't even work for law enforcement. But the name of the bus route, Cass Hollow Unified, Unit 42, had circulated just enough in recent months that something about it made her pause. She emailed the record to the tip line listed on the news segment about Gracie Dunn. Within 48 hours, the bus was located in a municipal auction yard outside Tulsa. It had been stripped, repainted, partially gutted. But when a forensic team arrived and unscrewed the warped access panel beneath the driver's platform, they found what none of them wanted to see: long blonde hairs, preserved in the seams. And further back, deep inside a rusted crevice near the emergency brake lines, something small and discolored wedged between coils. A child's sneaker. It took another day to recover the second shoe. Both matched the pair Gracie had been photographed in the week she vanished. The laces were frayed, one eyelet torn. But the size, style, and a faint Sharpie letter G inside the tongue confirmed the match. DNA analysis later sealed it. But it wasn't the shoes themselves that changed everything. It was where they were found, inside a portion of the bus that no one should have had access to from the interior. The compartment was external, intended for maintenance use only, which meant that if Gracie's shoes had ended up there, someone had placed them, or someone had hidden her, or she had crawled in herself. None of the scenarios made sense. The panel door was bolted from the outside. There was no known access from within the cabin, and yet, the finger smudges found along the interior metal were small, partial prints, oil from skin long decayed, but unmistakable in pattern. They trailed along the edges like someone had once tried to push their way out. The horror wasn't in what they found. It was in how long it had gone unnoticed. Lane sat in the empty auction yard that night long after the others left. The bus stood behind the tape, inert and monstrous. Its tires flat, windows opaque with dust, as if none of this had ever happened. But someone had known. Someone had closed that panel. Someone had driven that route, heard nothing, seen nothing, and locked everything away. Gracie hadn't vanished. She'd been here all along.